so much work just goes into starting the show. All right, welcome back to the last big question on the left. I'm Ben Kissel, here with Marcus Parks and the always entertaining Henry Zabrowski. We are on part 108 of our 900-part series, Interviews and How to Avoid Them. Interviews. Do you enjoy doing interviews? Do you dislike doing interviews? What are some of the best and worst interviews that you've heard, seen, or read? Are there any questions you've always wanted to be asked? Is there anyone whom you would like to be interviewed by? I think that covers just about everything, except for alien abduction. All right, so I'm going to come right out of the gate with the worst interview of all time, which may also be the best interview of all time. This is Billy Corgan, and we'll have a link up. You need to see it. It's from 1994, the year got married. 1994, it's Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins interviews Nick Cave. And a lot of you young people are watching going, well, Nick Cave, isn't that the guy the guy who owns the typewriter store and collects vinyl and has the handlebar mustache and plays old-timey baseball? Isn't that the guy he likes? Okay, again, we've touched on this before in this show. There are different Nick Caves. That's the Nick Cave that exists now. We are more used to the old Nick Cave, and this is the old Nick Cave, the old scary Nick Cave, the one who stood as a lesson to everybody. The same way that if you talk to a young person now about Times Square, they think, oh, the Lion King and all this, the Disney store. But if you talk to us about Times Square, completely different picture. So this is, Nick Cave is not in at all to being interviewed by Billy Corgan, and Billy Corgan has no idea who Nick Cave is. It's a beautiful thing. So that's probably the worst. Moving on to two of my favorite interviews. They're both from a show called The Hustle with a guy named John Lamoureux. I actually been on this show, and I'd listened to it a few times, and the only reason I was on it, I was really impressed with Mr. Lamoureux. There are two interviews from this show that you really need to hear, and they're examples of great interviews. The first, believe it or not, was a guy called Sean Dickson from the Soup Dragons. Now, when I chanced upon this, I'll be honest, I could not care less about the Soup Dragons. I remember they were like a 90s rave band from England that had that, I'm free to do what I want, that sort of Stones cover. You listen to this interview and your heart breaks. It's about halfway through. John, and it's a regular interview up to that point, up to the halfway mark. John's talking to the guy about, his early career and what type of music he likes to play and how he's been DJing and stuff. And then about halfway through, John asks him about the money from I'm Free. And basically what happens is that this guy, Sean Dickson, explains, I get no money from that song whatsoever. It's not strictly a cover. Sean reimagined it. The reason people know the song now is because of the Soup Dragons. The Stones did it like once and then abandoned it. And Sean, being young, asked, well, just basically Alan Klein, I'm jumping around. Alan Klein was the guy who was the manager of the Stones. And he told the Soup Dragons, either the Stones get all the credit or you can't release the song. And the Soup Dragons didn't know it was going to be huge. They said, well, can you put it on as a B-side? But since it's really my concept of the song is what Sean said. Can you list me as the arranger? So they did, but no money. And he talks about the mental toll that it takes knowing that you could be collecting tens of millions of dollars because they used it on soundtrack. And every version they use is pretty much the Soup Dragons version. That's the version. When people cover it, they imagine themselves, they think they're covering a Soup Dragons song. Nobody knows it as a Stones song. And this guy just talks about how heartbreaking it is and how difficult it is to deal with that. As they go on, you find out that he never knew he was gay. He had some inklings. He had been married. He had a young daughter. He basically came out of the closet. He met his husband. And by the end of it, the interviewer and the interviewee are crying. It is an absolutely amazing video. Amazing audio. It is, you're just sitting there like, wow, this is very well done. So, and you'll probably cry too, even if you're a old tough punk like myself. The other one, if you need something to cheer you up after that, a couple of weeks later, he did an interview with a guy I had never heard of named Stephen Lipson. No offense, Stephen, if you're watching. But Stephen was a producer. People, you think you know how crazy Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown were? Oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. This guy talks about working with them and how completely bonkers they were. He talks about showing up thinking he was going to produce something for Bruce Hornsby, only to find out not only was Bruce Hornsby not aware that he was showing up, but he was going to go see Sinatra that night. So he's like, "You want to come with us?" And he's like, "Why not?" So they get to see Sinatra lose his toupee. It is amazing. If you ever see interviews with producers, and that's why I like this show. He doesn't just interview one small segment of the music world. He opens it up. There's another show which is called Nothing Shocking, and they interview just about everybody, but they'll occasionally let somebody be a wackadoodle, whereas this guy shuts them down. They go to do that. The latest one he interviewed today, I was listening to him interview Rat Scabies. Did you guys know Rat Scabies frequently and regularly hunts for the Holy Grail? He does.
It would not be made out of gold.
That's the cup of a carpenter.
Yeah, I got, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, as for me, I don't like doing interviews anymore. I'm really actively no longer doing interviews. If you want to have me on to talk about Dungeons and Dragons or cryptids or some fun thing like that, yeah, fine. I'll be on your thing. But as far as particularly in print, I'm pretty much done with that. We have a publicist for our record company, really super nice person, but it's always, okay, here's an interview with the same thing again, or hey, this person wants to interview you, and I'm like, have you ever seen that website? So I just, yeah, I'm tapping out of the interview world. I think why I'm still ahead. When I was young, I used to see like Rolling Stone. It was always the same interview in Rolling Stone. It was always the same answers. Like, well, I double tracked the guitar with a 12 string, and I think it's our best album yet. And I'm really looking forward to touring Europe. Shut up. The only thing I have in common with Morrissey, other than having an adjacent birthday, is that we both lived in our heads for about a million years growing up, preparing for later life and kind of knowing how we would torpedo these sort of interviews. To this day, I can remember a piece in Rolling Stone about Chrissie Hynde that was mostly about her underwear. And I remember reading that and thinking she's a beautiful woman, but I was a teenager and I didn't care about her underwear. So imagine that. I thought, I really want to hear about her music. Let's talk about that. So yeah, I think, and that's just the way the music world is. There aren't many real sort of music journalists left, so that's where I am. And I think that every interviewer should ask two questions of a musician. I've said this for years. First, what was the last piece of music that you purchased? And the second one is, what was the last concert that you attended? So those are two that I think should definitely be asked. And as for who I'd like to be interviewed by, I'd always wanted the guys from I Die You Die to interview me. I always thought that would be fun. So those are my answers to the questions that I post. So now we go to mixed martial arts fighter Joe Jack Talcum to get his thoughts.
I was never crazy about interviews, and I'm a terrible person to interview because I don't say too much usually. But back in the day, like Rodney kind of alluded to this, whenever there's something to promote, there's a publicist involved. And I always got the feeling, especially in the 80s when we were promoting our albums, that the person doing an interview didn't want to be doing it. And I didn't want to be doing it, but we had to for some reason. And they're just looking for a quote to pull. And if you just give them that quote, they'll be happy. Otherwise, it's just a slog and you have to do it. You have to do it. It's just one of the unfortunate things about trying to sell records to make a living. We don't really have to make a living selling records anymore. So I guess like Rodney, we can just say no. But I have done some interviews that I enjoyed, and generally I like the interviews where the interviewer does a little research and actually listens to what you're saying and asks questions that aren't typical ones because they've already got answers for the other ones. And it's more like a conversation. Those can be good where they're asking a question based on one of your answers, and it just goes along like that. One of my favorite interviews done with me was done by Mike Ace, not a journalist per se, but he, in case you don't know, he is one of our friends, but particularly Dean's friend. And he had an online site called Ook World. It's not there anymore, but he had interviews and articles and things. It was very interesting. And he did an interview with me about collecting children's records, which I had a big collection of at the time, and that was fun. And it was done by email, but each question, I wouldn't get the next question until I answered that question. So it had the sense of a conversation. As for what questions I like to be asked or want to be asked, I guess the question that no one's ever asked me is, why on earth are you doing this music thing?
I ask you that every time I see you.
But not in an interview. Because I sometimes wonder that myself. But anyway, interviews that an interview that maybe the worst interview I've ever encountered is with Bob Dylan, and it's in the middle of his famous documentary "Don't Look Back," and it's for me it's kind of excruciating. It must have been for the interviewer. A young kid from Time magazine interviewed him, and he was just very cruel to this person. So maybe you could laugh at it, but I just cringed because he's just a jerk. Bob Dylan's such a jerk to this guy, and it's on film and in the middle of the movie. Two of my favorite interviews are by Terry Gross on Fresh Air, and Rodney specifically asked this question about interviews about musicians. So there's two interviews she did with Jonny Greenwood, one in 2016. I can't find that one to listen to again, but he explains in that one about how he joined the band Radiohead. They had kicked out they were called On a Friday at the time. They had a keyboard player that they didn't like. He played too loud. So they got Jonny, whose brother was in the band, Colin, the bass player. He played keyboards after that, but according to him, for the first 6 months, he didn't even have his sound turned up because I don't know. I guess he wasn't feeling all that confident. And Tom York said, "Oh, I can't really hear exactly what you're doing, but I know you're doing something good because when you're not playing, I notice it's not there anymore." But he said, "Well, that's not really true. He didn't say it, but there's no sound coming out." And gradually he would start to turn the sound up as he got more confident with the chords he was playing. And then the second interview, that was from 2016. The second one, she interviewed him again in 2022 about his film score work, and I think it's really interesting. I did find a link to that one, so I'll put that in we'll put the link to that one. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on.
I'm still stuck on picturing a whole bunch of children's records lined up leading up to an abandoned well. You know what I mean? Like I haven't got past collecting children's records. Everything else was just a blur.
A pretty big collection, mostly from thrift shops.
Okay. All right. Dan, if you've recovered from plibbing, I think you're next. If you've recovered from plibbing on Friday night, give us your thoughts.
I think so. So what was the question? Do I like
answer in an interview?
Yeah, I think I sent this in what we call an email on the planet. Email. The question was, do you enjoy doing interviews? Do you dislike doing interviews? What are some of the best and worst interviews you've ever heard, seen, read? Are there any questions you want to be asked? Is there anyone by whom you would like to be interviewed?
Let's start with that one. Anyone I'd like to be interviewed by, or by whom I'd like to be interviewed?
By whom? Yeah.
Let's say God.
Mm-hmm.
Do I like doing interviews? Not really. I don't mind doing individual interviews. Like I liked doing the one for the Vintage Annals Archive with Rich. That was cool. He asked a lot of cool questions. I did one for Brooke from Froggy a couple years ago. And I did one a few years ago with that puppet. And other than
Hey, Rudy Giuliani does not like being called that puppet.
Sorry, the puppet. Yeah, I haven't done many besides the 150 odd ones we've done for the past 3 years with this, which could be considered interview.
181.
Is that really 180?
Yeah, 181. This is episode 181.
Wow. You hear that, folks? 181.
Make sure to like and subscribe.
They should just say like and subscribe, ass, grass, or gas. That's it. Nobody rides for free.
But yeah, I don't really care to do band interviews. I always feel like I end up just not saying much. But I don't know how much people want to hear out of me. So that's another thing about interviews. I like watching uncomfortable interviews more than anything, or listening. I don't know if like David Letterman counts as like interviewing people, but I always liked Andy Kaufman's appearances on David Letterman. I love this Lou Reed interview. I think it's in Australia, and it's all these bright, you know what I'm talking about? There's like bright light, and he's got the sunglasses on, and every question he's just so like, no, sometimes, and he like changes his answer like later. Like they ask like if he spends money on drugs, and he was like, no, I don't do drugs. And then like a couple of minutes later, they're like, what do you do with your money? And he's like, I buy drugs.
That's a train wreck of an interview. Yes.
Yeah. That's probably the best and worst. And like Joe was saying about the Bob Dylan one, it's like who was saying about it's worse for the interviewers than the interviewee, because it seems like he's kind of having fun with it. And let's see, where were the other questions? See, I'm no good at interviews either. Yeah, what was it?
Let me see. Are there any questions you've always wanted to be asked?
No.
All right. All right, Dean, I think you're up next.
Okay. I don't particularly mind doing interviews. I do remember back in the day, we used to have a lot of fun with interviews by just making shit up.
Yes.
And Dave Blood used to do some of the best interviews because he would make some of the best shit up.
Remember we once told...
what's your favorite color? Clear.
He once told an interviewer in the middle of an interview that the song Dancing on the Ceiling was promoting crack cocaine use.
Yes. Yes, I think the interview on what was it, 120 minutes? Yeah, that was pretty fun. So yeah, I'm okay with doing interviews. I've certainly done a bunch this summer for Quaker City Quiet Pills release. And it seems like now most interviews are for like podcasts. I don't see many print interviews anymore because there's not that many magazines out there. I guess if you're being interviewed by Rolling Stone, that still comes out in magazine form. And there's not too many zines out there now like there used to be back in the day. So yeah, we used to get lots of kids in college and stuff when we were on tour interviewing us. And they were actually usually interested in the band. It's not like Joe said, there are some folks out there that could care less. They were writing for their local newspaper. Oh, I got to put in the interview with the band playing at Spanky's this weekend, right?
Milkmen deliver.
Yeah, right. So yeah, there were a couple that Dan, you mentioned the Vintage Annals archive with Rich. I've got that one linked. That I've got part 2, which is you and I. If people dig around, they can find the first part with Joe and Rodney. I did one for the New Wave Music Podcast, which actually starts out with a record review. The two guys who do that out in Salt Lake City review the record, and they like the record. And then there's a segment with me at the end where they interview me. And then I also did one, which unfortunately I think I kind of lost the link to and then refound it again. It's called What Difference Does It Make podcast with some fine folks out in California. And anyway, I'll provide links to all of these here. As for a couple of favorite interviews, and it's more of a sketch than an interview, but it's kind of an interview. It's when Tom Waits was on Fernwood Tonight. It starts out with him playing a song called "The Piano Has Been Drinking," and then he talks to Barth, and it's kind of a comedy sketch, but it's pretty funny. And it's kind of makes fun of the late night TV interview format where, you know, somebody comes out to plug their film or their record or their new musical. So it's kind of fun. And then I was remembering the famous 1976 interview of the Sex Pistols by Bill Grundy, which kind of cost him his career, but made the Sex Pistols one of the most popular bands in England at the time.
But the most shocking thing they did was swearing on TV. An incident so outrageous that in the time since it first happened, it's only ever been seen again 300 or maybe 400 times in music documentaries.
Anyway, so those are two. As for questions, I don't know. Ask me anything. I could decline to answer everything. And I don't particularly have anybody I would like to be interviewed by. So anyway, those are my answers.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to interview you. And now we move on to my favorite part of the show, recommendations. All right, so I got home Friday night around 1 a.m. from plibbing, and I plibbed hard. Dan was there. Dan was plibbing hard. We plibbed hard. Dan, I often wondered why you have to be 21 to plib. Now I know. Whoa, we saw some interesting things. But anyway, I got home and I was getting ready to go to bed. Vienna was still downstairs getting ready. And I popped into bed, I put on YouTube, and there in my recommendations was the Mile Deep Hollow documentary, which I was apparently done in 2020. I didn't know existed. This is, of course, a documentary about the band IAMX, and you will often see me wearing an IAMX hat pretty much in every video since I got the hat. It's a documentary about IAMX, and it's absolutely amazing. I think in order to see it, you have to subscribe to the IAMX YouTube channel, and then it'll pop up, but it's worth the effort. In it, Chris Corner talks very bluntly about his mental health issues, about his deep depression, how that caused his insomnia, and the insomnia created like a circle with the depression. Is he depressed enough to be considered an outsider musician? Unfortunately, no, because my great aunt hasn't heard of him. And in order to be an outsider musician, she's had to hear of you. But they interview everybody in the band. Sammy wasn't on tour with them, but she was in the production thing for this. And let me tell you, I've seen Chris in this be a rather tough taskmaster, and I thought maybe I would not like to work for him. But still, again, it's really, really good. At one point, John, the drummer, starts talking about the Ramones beat that he's playing on I Come With Knives, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. And I'm like, I never realized that's a Ramones beat in there. He's a really interesting guy. Janine's in it. All the band members are interesting. Speaking of I Come With Knives, they auctioned off stuff in order to pay for the documentary. I know what you're thinking. Why not just get Disney to pay for it and make 8 hours of documentary? You people aren't getting it, are you? But it's one of the things they auctioned off was the hat that Chris wore in the I Come With Knives video. I don't care what they asked for it. I'm lucky I didn't know it was up for auction. I would have definitely bought that. I would very much like to own the hat. So that's just one of the things. They auctioned off a bunch of equipment. But again, I am a big IAMX fan. Please see the IAMX documentary. Again, it's called Mile Deep Hollow, and serious part is when Chris talks about his depression. All right, also this week, or the other day, came out the new Bestial Mouths album, R.O.T.T, parenthetically, In My Skin. Everybody's been looking forward to this, and some people are calling it an instant classic. I don't know if I go that far. I haven't had enough listens, but I really like it. So if you've heard me kind of mention this thing coming for a while on a couple episodes, and I've mentioned the single that came off of it, you're going to want to get this. $10 for the whole digital album. So please consider buying that. And then the last thing I want to promote, and this is being held at a theater near us and probably coming to a theater near you, it's a Golden Girls murder mystery, a Halloween caper. I want all 4 of us to go as the Golden Girls, each one of us to be a Golden Girl for this. It's like a murder mystery thing. I don't know much, but help us out, folks. If you've made it this far in this, in the comments section, tell us which Golden Girl you think each of us is. I'm a Dorothy. I want to pretend to be a Blanche, but I'm a Dorothy. I can see that. So yeah, just let us know in the comments which Golden Girl each of us are, and hopefully we can make it to that presentation, to the murder mystery solving thing, dressed as the Golden Girls. And I would just like to say thank you for being a friend. All right, Joe.
I want to recommend a book. I happen to be on vacation. I happen to be on vacation now. I'm down the shore. I'm in a beach house, but this is the only book I brought with me. I'm halfway through it. It's really good, although I don't really recommend reading it on vacation. It's a bit of a downer. It's called American Whitelash, A Changing Nation and the Cost of Progress by Wesley Lowery. And basically it's about white supremacy in the United States. It's been part of our history, I guess, in forever, but it was bubbling under. It didn't come to the forefront, as he described, according to Michael, until the election of Barack Obama, which most of us thought was a great thing. And I think Obama was a very good president, but a lot of people didn't, for the simple reason that he wasn't white. And it's a frustrating book to read, but I think it's also interesting and important, and it explains a lot of things that the news stories about a lot of the hate crimes that happened didn't delve into, and he makes connections, and he also has parallels to post-Civil War Reconstruction era, the KKK and things like that. So, and I'm only halfway through it, but I can already tell it's good, and I recommend it.
Nazis. I hate these guys.
Dan?
Well, first I'd like to say that I would like to be interviewed by Terry Gross. I don't think it would ever happen, but I just think she's a great
bring your tote bag.
Or my mug. I paid $29.95 a month. I would like to recommend Nook Creative Music School. I know I already did a few months ago, but I finally actually started working there as music teacher. It's part-time to start, but already it seems pretty cool. It's not like traditional teaching, and the kids are like anywhere between 4 and like 18, and adults can do it too. They do group lessons, or I should say we do group lessons. You can sign up for like a free trial, and if you do that now, you might get me as your teacher. So, or not you, because I doubt there's any kids, like little kids watching.
I need some training. No, I'm going to sign up. I need some training.
Yeah, and somehow I'm teaching drums, bass, guitar, piano, and ukulele. So, yeah, it's really cool. And they just expanded from a small like house in Doylestown to this place that was formerly a music school called the Conservatory, and lots more classrooms, lots more students can come. So yeah, I recommend if you have a kid or you are a kid and you want to take an instrument lesson, come to Nook. Yeah.
I would like to recommend a pair of videos from the Stu Mac YouTube channel. For those who are unfamiliar, Stuart McDonald is a supplier of tools and resources for guitar makers. These two particular videos are part 1 and part 2. They showcase luthier Dan Erlewines getting his old guitar back after 50 years. And the second one shows the restoration of it and how it's coming back to being playable again. He sold it to a friend for like $200 50 years ago. And his friend did all kinds of wacky modifications and things to it. But he got it back after his friend unfortunately passed away. It was bequeathed to Dan, since it was his originally. And it's quite interesting. Part one, he kind of shows you what the guitar, what kind of shape it's in. It's in pretty bad shape. And then part two, it all comes together. He gets some help in getting everything back working together. It's really cool the way it all comes together. So check it out. If you're interested in guitars, I think you'll find it pretty interesting.
Well, you said 2 videos from him.
Two.
I accidentally hit test and it made this little song.
Indiana, Indiana Jones, Indiana, Indiana Jones. He's running, he's jumping, we hope he doesn't trip. He's leaping, he's creeping, he's going for his whip. Indiana. I'm the only one who knows the words of that song.